Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Tides of Teen Behavior, presented by Jessica Hilbun. My name is Nicole Gibby Mungia. I'm the Program Officer for Continuing Education for YALSA. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few features of our webinar software. During today's program, we'll be communicating with each other via chat. At any time during the discussion, you may submit your questions to Jessica using the chat box, which is located on the left-hand side of your screen. She'll make every attempt to answer the questions as they come in or as they fit into the flow of the discussion. If we run out of time to answer a specific question, don't worry, we'll make sure to follow up with the group with an answer. If you would prefer to not see the chat box during the webinar, you may click on the full screen button, which is located on the upper right-hand side of your screen, and that will eliminate the chat and attendee list boxes. To undo the full screen view, simply click on that button again. Located at the top of your screen in the middle, you should see an image of a person with her hand raised. If you click on the arrow next to the image of the person, you'll see that you have a variety of options, which include raising your hand, laughing, applauding, agreeing, disagreeing, etc. If you experience any audio issues, please type into the chat box to let me know, and I'll work with you to resolve them. Following today's presentation, you will receive a link to the webinar recording and PowerPoint slides. If you'd like to receive a certificate of participation, please email me following the webinar, and I'd be happy to send that along to you. Jessica, I now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Tides of Teen Behavior. I'm so glad you could all join us today. This is such an important topic. So my name is Jessica Hilbun. I'm your FAB facilitator for the day. I am the Teen Services Librarian at the Louisville Public Library in Louisville, Colorado. I've actually only been in this current job for a few weeks. I'm still a newbie here, and before that, I was working in teen services at a library in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Before we get started, I would just love it if everybody could introduce themselves and share where they're from, what library they work at. Is it a public library? Is it a school library? I'd love to get a better sense of the crowd that we've got here today. Most of my experience comes from working in public libraries, but I did work in an academic library briefly while I was in grad school. Good, nice use of the chat box, folks. Good job. We're all spread out around the country. This is great. Awesome. It looks like we got a wide range of folks here. It's always good when we can get a wide variety of backgrounds. Great. All right, I want to talk to y'all a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about teen development, why our teens are acting the way that they do. We'll cover some best practices for preventing bad behavior in the library. We're going to talk about the different types of behaviors that we'll encounter in a library setting. And then we're going to talk about how to confront that bad behavior. What are some things that you can do before an interaction, during an interaction, and after a confrontation with a misbehaving teen? I'm going to try to answer some of your questions. And then throughout, I'll be sharing some of my personal stories about behavioral issues that I have dealt with in the library before. Now I want to get started with a quick poll question. Nicole, could you cue up that first poll question, please? All right, first question. What is your role at your library? Are you a teen services librarian, an administrator? Are you a general librarian? Do you work in youth services, working with both children and teens? Or did teens just fall into that other duties as required section of your job description? This is great. Good. It looks like we've got a lot of folks that already have some experience dealing with teen behavior. All right, great. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer that. All right, let's begin. So we're going to start with talking about teen development. It is so important to learn about this topic because, as you'll see, a lot of those behavioral quirks that teens have stem from the biological changes that they're going through. And understanding that can make it so much easier to sympathize with them and to interact with them. So first, I want to talk a little bit about brain development and just give you a quick spoiler alert. Your teens are supposed to be acting this way. It's in their brains. So the brain does the bulk of its maturation between the ages of 12 and 20. I know you often hear a lot about how the brain develops during those first couple years of life, and that is definitely true. But during those teen years, the most sophisticated part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, begins to develop and mature during those adolescent years. The prefrontal cortex is often referred to by scientists as the bringer of civilization, and that is because it is that magical part of the brain that gives us those gifts of emotional control, impulse restraint, and rational decision making. Basically, all of those really important things that make us adults. That is what teens are developing in that prefrontal cortex. And because it's still developing and growing, teens tend to respond with gut reactions to situations. They don't have the time to think and control their emotions and think about how to react. So they'll respond with quick gut reactions. And then they also have a hard time interpreting the actions and motivations of others. There's so much in their own heads that it's really hard for them to interpret why others behave the way that they do. So you can see they're still really learning how to control themselves, so it's understandable why they can act a little wild and crazy. And when your brain is building these neural connections, you've got to use them or you'll lose them. And because of this, it's really important for us as adults who work with teens to really help them exercise those prefrontal cortexes and help them strengthen that so that they can become positive, mature adults who make good choices. Teens are also doing a ton of emotional and social development, as you know. One of the primary tasks of adolescence is individuation, the development of your distinct identity. I'm sure you all remember going through this process. So as their brains are developing, as those prefrontal cortexes are growing and strengthening, so does the teen's ability to think critically and to think abstractly. They will begin asking themselves big, important questions like, who am I? Where do I fit in? What do I want my future to be like? And they will spend a ton of time thinking about these things. So it will come as no surprise to you all that this process is linked to increased egocentrism. I'm sure y'all have noticed that teens tend to be a little bit egocentric, and that is totally normal. During this time, this period of individuation, your teens will also begin to separate from their parents. They start gaining a little more independence, and they'll often try to test authority. It happens a lot with parents, but it can happen with teachers, librarians, other adult authority figures, and that's just part of them trying to do that transition from childhood to adulthood. It also becomes super important for them to find a peer group to fit in with and to socialize with them frequently. It helps you figure out who you are if you can find that different peer group that really makes you feel like you get yourself. So that means that traveling in packs and talking nonstop is 100% normal. I know it can be a little bit irritating to us at the library, but it's completely normal for them. I should also mention this fun fact. Adolescence is actually the second period of individuation that we go through as humans. And the first is the terrible twos. I love that. You can really see a lot of similarities sometimes between toddlers and teens. They're going through some of the same stuff, right? I know my teens often act a little bit like toddlers. All right, I couldn't resist throwing in this little throwback for you all. Part of developing your identity is trying on different hats. You're asking yourself, where do I fit in? What group am I a part of? Am I popular? Am I a jock? Am I a punk? A hipster? A goth? They're trying to figure out what kind of subgroup they might fit into. And back in my day, many of us identified as emo. And here's a graphic from a 1999 issue of 17 magazine that attempted to help teens figure out just how emo they were. All right, you guys, now fess up. Did anybody else go through an emo phase when they were in high school? I know I totally did. I had a pair of those Rivers Cuomo Buddy Holly glasses, the whole 9 yards. I had those chunky Mary Janes that girl has on, plenty of Argyle socks. Totally went through that phase. Okay, good. Thanks, Leah. I'm glad I'm not the only person. Ooh, a punk goth phase. Yes, I knew some folks that did that too. Yep. See, it's kind of fun to, you don't always want to think back to your teen years. Sometimes that's a little bit scary, but some of this stuff is kind of fun to remember those silly things that you tried to do, the clothes you wore, trying to express yourself. Oh, Stephanie, love it. Love the Heather's quote. Plaid flannels. Okay, you guys are making me feel better about my chunky Mary Janes and my Buddy Holly glasses. Love it. Okay. All right, moving on a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit to you or with you about teen development and noise and why teens are just so gosh darn loud sometimes. So, first of all, that increased need to socialize that teens get, combined with that egocentrism, means that teens talk all the time. They talk so much, and they don't always realize how loud they're being. Something else to remember, especially when it comes to teen boys, is that they're going through those body changes and their voices are changing, and they may still be learning how to adjust their volume accordingly. Sometimes it's hard for them to whisper. They don't realize how loud they're being. Just part of that awkward voice change that they have to go through. I've also found that when teens enter a space with other teens, especially if both boys and girls are present, then that need to be noticed causes some really, really wacky behavior, especially with younger tweens. At least in my experience, they tend to be the worst offenders of this needing to be noticed. I find that when that happens, their reactions tend to be super over the top. Any joke that they hear is like the funniest joke in the world, and they laugh super, super loud at it. When something bad happens to one of their friends, like, oh my God, it's the worst thing in the world, and they have to lament about it really, really loud. This is it's annoying, but it's a little bit entertaining. The posturing that can happen. Girls will start preening. Boys will do weird things like lifting chairs to show their strength. I find a lot of burping happens for some reason to try to cause a reaction. All of this stuff happens. Have you guys experienced this in your library? I get the burping a lot. I actually get more girls than boys burping. I don't know what that's about, but that's something that happens in here all the time. It's disgusting, but they find it hysterical. Okay, good. I'm so glad you guys can relate. The burping is a thing. Luckily, farting doesn't tend to be a thing. That's good. I'm at least grateful for that. At least they can stick to the burping. I get a lot of boys too. They're still getting comfortable with their bodies, and they're so clumsy. They trip over things all the time. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose to try to get a laugh or what, but tripping over chairs, that kind of stuff happens all the time. Oh, Stephanie mentioned body odor. That is an unfortunate thing that we have to deal with in the library too, and not just with teens. Oh yeah, that can be a bummer. They're still learning all of these changes. They're embarrassed by them. They don't quite know how to deal with it, but they still can't help wanting to be noticed by each other, wanting to be acknowledged by each other. Yes, Erin, deodorant is your friend. And don't be afraid to advertise that. This is good. All of these things, kind of annoying, tend to make a lot of noise, can be very disruptive, but again, it's all 100% normal. And it helps if you can just shake it off and laugh at it, because so much of it is just pure entertainment, so hysterical. All right, so Stephanie is saying that she's worried about parents not explaining some of these hygiene basics. And it's tough because it's not your place exactly to have that chat with them. You know, I haven't had to deal with this specifically with teens, but what you might try to do is see if you can get some of their friends involved. Because I'm sure you're not the only one with the nose who can smell it. See if you can chat with one of their friends. Oh my gosh, Julia, Axe. Yes, we have a little study room in my teen space, and at the end of the day, I always make sure to keep the door open to air it out because it either smells like body odor or Axe. The two extremes, nothing in the middle. Yes, like Maggie, I've also had more of an issue with adult body odor. Yeah, and some guys never outgrow that Axe. That's just something as folks working with the public, you have to kind of learn to deal with. Air freshener is your friend. Having good circulation in your space is your friend. And it's true, yeah, sometimes they're not going to listen to their parents. It's really tough. You have to really walk that fine line with certain teens. Definitely. All right, I'm going to move on, guys. Great discussion, though. Feel free to continue chatting. Before we move on, I want to do one more poll here. Nicole, could you queue up the second poll question, please? So before we start talking about preventing bad behavior, I just wanted to get a sense of, in your library, who is responsible for dealing with teen behavioral issues? I know at a lot of libraries, everybody kind of defaults to the teen librarian and expects you to deal with everything. Sometimes you have a security guard if you're at a bigger space. Good, it looks like a lot of you, all of your staff is involved. Okay, good. That's helpful when you can get some other folks involved to have your back and support you. Okay, good. All right, I feel like I've got a good sense, ready to move on. All right, next I want to talk about how having a great teen space can help you prevent bad behavior in your library. Now, in our wildest dreams, all of our teen spaces would be giant, beautiful, glorious. They would be completely separate from spaces for adults and children. They'd be a little bit soundproof so that your teens could make some noise. They'd have tons of great seating for socializing and working. They would be well staffed, easy to monitor, and all of the staff would just adore working with teens and would be awesome at it, and the teens would love it, and everybody would just be so happy all of the time. But, of course, this is real life, and in reality, I have never met a single teen or a single librarian who believes their teen space is 100% perfect. So we've got to learn to shake what our mamas gave us and work with what we've got. So even if you can't offer your teens the ideal space, you can offer them a positive, welcoming environment. You know, I think it's so important to say hello to everybody that enters your space, no matter how old they are, make eye contact, and get away from the desk, especially during those after-school hours where things get a little more crowded. Get out from behind your desk fortress and interact with your teens as much as you can. It really helps to get to know your teens as individuals and to interact with them as much as possible. Now, in my experience, I found that teens tend to behave better and respect you more if they see you as a regular person rather than some nameless authority figure just sitting behind a desk. In life, you would be less likely to break a rule if you knew that doing so was going to disappoint one of your friends. And I think teens tend to abide by that philosophy, so you can get on their good side. They're going to want to keep you happy. They're not going to want to offend you because they like hanging out with you, talking with you, and they respect you. I also think that having high expectations for your teens in your library is critical. If you expect teens to be bad, you're going to portray that in your body language and how you speak with them, and it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're too harsh with your teens or you're too aggressive, you risk pushing them away and causing them to act out of spite. And I've seen this happen before. You really want to try to be optimistic and assume that everybody is coming in with good intentions, with a pure heart, wanting to do good things. Have high expectations. You don't want to be like this grumpy librarian cat who's going to go around shushing everybody who enters in his teen space. You want to be welcoming and positive. Okay, so I came up with this little handy chart for you all with some specific things that you should and shouldn't do to help create a positive environment for the teens in your library. So you do want to use welcoming body language. You want to make eye contact, and you want to smile like you mean it. I always like to think of America's Next Top Model, where Tyra Banks used to tell everybody to smile with their eyes. Teens can tell if you're faking it. You want to be able to be genuinely happy that they're in your space and coming to use your library. I think it's great to try to learn names. I know I'm terrible with names, so it's something that I have to work with extra hard, but it really helps to create a personal connections to the teens that use your space. Ask about their interests. I've got a lot of boys that come in after school and play games, and I'm not really a gamer, but I love to ask them about the games they're playing, hear what's going on in their lives, and it's going to help you build those personal connections. It also helps you learn about ways that you can do programming. If you ask them about the stuff they're into, it might give you some really good ideas for your programming. It's so important to be confident. Your teens may be taller than you, they might be bigger than you, there may be way more of them in your space than there are of you, but you're still in charge. You are the head honcho. It's important to stand up tall and proud, and even if you're not feeling it, just try to fake it until you make it. Stand up tall, use good posture. This is a little trick that I learned in a public speaking class in college, and this is going to sound corny, but sometimes I have to give myself a little mental pep talk. Say things to myself like, you got this, girl, you're awesome, you can do this. It sounds so cheesy, so dumb. This is why you do it quietly in your head, but it can actually really help. So there's a little tip from me to you. Another really important thing in your space is to maintain good sight lines. And if there are areas in your space that are less visible, make sure to check them out often. I mentioned before that in my teen space we have this little study room in the corner, and it's very hard to see from the front of the space. It's kind of blocked off by some stacks. So I definitely try to walk around a lot just to make sure stuff isn't going on in there. A lot of times they try to sneak food in there, thinking that they're sneaky and private. We get some PDA action that happens in there. So I always try to walk by frequently, and we do have cameras in there. A lot of them know this already and will self-monitor, and if they don't, I let them know. Don't want to be a creeper or anything, but we do have a camera, so just make sure you're watching what you do back here. Very important. You don't want to do anything that's going to encourage any secret, sneaky, naughty behavior. So really try to monitor your space. And then the don'ts. You don't want to hide behind your desk. You really want to try to get out there as much as possible, especially because so many of our desks are kind of like fortresses. We've got walls up, we've got big computer monitors. Try to get out from behind your desk as much as possible. Don't cross your arms. Again, you really want to have welcoming body language, and that can signal to somebody that you're not in the mood to talk to them. This is a really important one. Don't try to act too cool. if you go up to them like, hey guys, what's up? You try to use slang that's outdated, that can totally kill things. That can cause your authority to plummet. They'll just think that you're silly. So just speak like you would to a normal adult. And that goes on to my last bullet here, which is use language or don't use language that you would use with a child. You really don't want to talk down to your teens, and you want to just talk to them like you would any other person on the street. For example, sometimes with kids, I'll come up to them and say, hey, boys and girls, how's it going? I would never want to say that to a group of teens. Instead, I like to say, hey, folks, or hey, guys, and just trying to make sure I'm keeping my language elevated. Do any of you guys have any other handy do's and don'ts that you like to try to remember when you're working with your teens? Any other thoughts that might help people out? Yes, don't tell them what to do. Definitely. Yes, do ask them for their help. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I think that's a really important thing. Oh, and Julia, that's excellent. Inviting them back when they leave is a really smart idea. I always like to say bye when my teens are leaving, but I love that, asking them to return. That's awesome. I like to sort of think of your teen space as kind of like your home, as though you're inviting guests to your home, and it's nice to greet them when they come in and then also invite them back as they're leaving. I love that. Oh, I love that, Edith. Allow for time for talking with them because sometimes they are kind of slow on the uptake. That is very, very true. Kind of like working again like with a toddler sometimes. Oh, Stephanie, that's great. See you next time. Awesome. And Aaliyah, that's perfect. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those things later on. But yes, you definitely want to present your behavioral things as choices. Definitely. Oh, good to see you. That's perfect. Yep. All right. I can already tell you guys are not beginners here. Yeah, forming relationships, as Becky said, super important. You don't want to put yourself in a weird situation where you're too close to your teens. You'll want to make sure there's a line. Like, you want to be friendly, but you don't want to be their best friend. So it is good. You want to form close relationships, but you do want to make sure that you keep that kind of line where you are the adult, they're the child, you are the authority figure. Excellent. All right, guys. Okay, now this is something that is super important, dealing with your staff. So to lead into this discussion about staff members, I have one final poll question for you. Nicole, could you cue that up, please? The third poll question. Now, how many of you are familiar, or how familiar are you with the Future of Teen Services Report's recommendations on creating a whole library and whole school approach to serving teens? Good. I'm glad most of you have at least heard of it a little bit. And if you're not familiar with it, don't worry, we're going to talk about it a little more, and I did provide a link to it at the end that you can check out later. This is a great segue because basically YALSA really encourages getting the whole library staff involved in working with teens. They really want to get your whole library to support you with the teen services. So it's important to get coordination among your staff. You're never going to be the only person in your library that interacts with teens, and you cannot be there 24/7. So you really want to empower your staff to work well with teens and to get them on the same page as you about what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. I have found that staff members who are uncomfortable with teens, who feel anxious or nervous by teens, can make behavior problems so much worse. If they're too harsh, they're going to alienate the teens. But if they're too soft, the teens are quickly going to figure that out and use it to their advantage. They are great at spotting those kinds of weaknesses, and softies are going to get manipulated by the teens. So I often try to think about that picture book. I hope you guys know this. Miss Nelson is Missing. That's one of my favorite books from when I was a kid. So if you are too nice to your teens, you're going to be like Miss Nelson. She was so nice to her class that they used to run wild, jumping up and down, throwing paper airplanes, throwing spitballs. If you're too nice, they are going to walk all over you. But you don't want to be like the mean substitute teacher, Miss Viola Swamp, because then you're going to scare them and you're going to alienate them. So instead, you're going to want to make like Goldilocks and find a balanced approach and encourage your staff to do this. So Goldilocks in the Three Little Bears, she always wanted things to be in the middle. When she went into the bear's house, Papa Bear's porridge was too hot, Mama Bear's porridge was too cold, but Baby Bear's was just right. Papa Bear's bed was too hard, Mama's was too soft, but Baby Bear's was just right. So be like Goldilocks, don't break into someone's house, but find a balanced approach to your teen services and encourage your staff to do the same thing. Okay, now I have a personal story to share with you that I'm feeling nervous and uncomfortable having to talk about, but I think it's very important because it can be really hard to get your staff on the same page. And this is it was a good learning experience for me because it's about a coworker who handled the situation poorly, and then I think I handled my response to her poorly as well. So this was a good learning experience. So at one of my previous libraries, we had a policy that stated that patrons could not move furniture around. It wasn't something that was a big issue. We didn't advertise it too widely because it just wasn't something we had to deal with very often. One evening, a large group of noisy teens had pushed some tables together and moved a bunch of chairs around in the teen space to accommodate their large group. And one of our longtime staffers was there, and she was, of course, one of the people who was the most uncomfortable with teens, and she saw that. And since I'd already left for the day, it was up to her to talk to them. And the next day, she recounted the interaction for me, so that's how I know exactly what went down. So she told me that she had gone up to the group and basically kind of chewed them out. She said that she told them, you can't move our furniture around however you please. I highly doubt your parents let you rearrange your house whenever you feel like it. Why would you think that you could do that here? Like, she really chewed them out. And oh my goodness, I was just feeling so terrible as she told me the story. And afterwards, I told her, I appreciate you trying to help. And then I gently tried to explain to her, in my experience, I found that scolding teens can really make matters worse. It doesn't always help them understand the rules. It can really upset them and make them feel ashamed and bad. And she responded by saying, she got kind of defensive, and she said, oh, I know, believe me, I had plenty of experience disciplining my kids when they were teens. Whew, and then I felt real awkward, because it put me in a weird position. I didn't want to be criticizing her or anything like that, but I did want to try to make it clear that what she had done was not an appropriate way to handle that situation. So I was just pretty flustered. I was flummoxed. I didn't really know what to do, so I was just like, okay, thanks, bye. I got out of there as soon as I can. And I don't want you all to have to deal with a really awkward situation like this. So I want to be able to talk with you guys a little bit more about how we can prevent a situation like this from happening. So what I ended up doing is I went to my director and spoke with her, and she then went to my coworker and told her that, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about providing an equity of service. All patrons should receive the same high quality of service from staff. So to help encourage and enable this, it's very important for your library policies and consequences to be very clear and consistently enforced by all staff members. It helps if every library has a set standard of behavior for all patrons, regardless of age. If yours doesn't, talk to your administrators about creating some kind of code of conduct. You're never going to get everybody 100% on the same page, but it really will help. There are also some things that you can do to help combat that unfair bias against teens among your staff. And I'm sure if you guys are free to chat about it, I'm sure you all have staff members that are not the greatest with teens. I think it would be great if you could familiarize them with some of the basics of teen development, like the things we talked about earlier, the prefrontal cortex, their inability to control themselves or think rationally. That might help them sympathize a little bit. Encourage them to stop and ask themselves before a confrontation if they would confront an adult or a child for engaging in the same behaviors. You know, in one of my libraries, after school, kids would run up the stairs to get to the teen space, and they would always get yelled at by circ staff. No running up the stairs, no running up the stairs. But I never once saw an adult get yelled at for running up the stairs. It's just one of those little things, those little biases that people can have. Sometimes I think it's great if you can bring in a guest speaker. You know, like my one coworker, she clearly, I didn't have any kids. She felt she had some authority because of that. When you bring in a guest speaker, they automatically seem credible. It's kind of a bummer, but it's true. People might be more willing to listen to a guest speaker than they do to you. So if you can do that, I think that could really help. And I would love it if any of you have any other ideas, please feel free to share them. Oh, Julia, I think that's awesome. That Inside the Teenage Mind from Frontline is really, really great for staff training. Awesome. And thank you for sharing the link. You are on the ball, girl. Thank you. A lot of them just, they feel uncomfortable around teens and just need to learn a little bit more about them. Oh, Edith says she created a bookmark with all of the rules for teens in the library. That's awesome. It's easy to pass around, easy to share with adults and teens. Oh, that's a really awesome idea. I love that. This is great. This is something that we're always going to have to dealing with folks and even other patrons that are prejudiced against teens. Oh, Edith, your library sounds incredible. She gives a short presentation at the beginning of the year to refresh staff members. That is an awesome idea. Because that's the thing. After the summer, things are a little bit weird. It's nice to go into that school year with a refresher. Yes, Erica is asking about dealing with a small teen space, or not a separate teen space, trying to deal with noise. Erica, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about some things that you can do, but I think it'd be great if you have like a meeting room in your library, if you can offer some programs after school, try to spread folks around a little bit in the space. That can really help. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Feel free to talk about it in the chat box, though, folks. All right, so like I just said, another great way to prevent bad behavior and also to limit the noise is to keep your teens busy. This is really, really important. You've probably heard that expression, idle hands are the devil's playthings. Basically that boredom can cause bad behavior. And I think that's true, and we can prevent boredom-induced naughtiness by keeping our teens busy. If you can, offer programs geared to their interests, and these don't have to be elaborate. Some people just don't have the staff or the resources to do that. I posted photos here from 3 of my really, really most easy but fun programs that I did. That first picture to the far left, the minion, is from a modeling clay program. All I did was buy some modeling clay, throw it out on a table, and say, go to town. I didn't have to do any planning. It's very easy to clean up because modeling clay, it's not wet or sticky or anything. It's kind of like Play-Doh. It was great because teens could drop in. The kids that are after school for just a few minutes waiting for their parents were able to pop in for like 10 or 15 minutes, but then people were free to stay for the whole hour. So easy. That middle picture is of a book hedgehog, which I cannot believe how successful this was. All you need is some weeded paperbacks or manga, put them out, put out a sheet of instructions for how to fold, and let them go. It's something that they can sit and do while they chat, listen to music, and it's so easy. And then this last one, I could not believe, I thought this sounded like the silliest thing, and it was so successful, was creating pet rocks. Literally all I did was go outside, collect some rocks from our parking lot. I grabbed art supplies that we had on hand, googly eyes, pipe cleaners, glitter glue, and they had so much fun. I had one of my largest crowds ever for programming at the Pet Rock program. I was shocked. So clearly, you really don't have to break the bank. You don't have to go all out for your programs. Even these simple programs can be a really successful way to keep kids occupied after school. Passive activities can also be really great. For example, I love to put out adult coloring sheets for my teens. And when I say adult, I don't mean like 50 Shades of Grey coloring sheets. But I mean, you might have seen there have been a lot of new adult coloring books produced that have more abstract designs, mandalas, very intricate floral designs. There are tons of free printable ones that you can find online. So I'll print some of those out. Throw them out with some crayons, and it can be a really great way to keep them busy and let them relax. Another thing that I love to do is have them help me with projects. It can be really empowering and rewarding for teens if they feel like they've helped you out. I will have teens who help me with shelf reading, who help me make displays, who help me make book lists. Sometimes the children's librarians will need help cutting out things for a program. I'll have them help with that, and they really like to do that. Another thing you can do is get them involved in making the rules. It can really help give your teens a sense of ownership over the space if they can come up with the rules themselves. Get a tab group going, get a suggestion box, maybe have kids vote. I think they're a lot more likely to follow the rules if they've helped create them. Oh, real quick, Edith's asking about the ages of the teens who participated in passive programs. In my library, I get a lot of tweens who come in and play on the computer or come to the more active programs. And then the passive things, I find actually older kids do. I get all ages probably doing these things. But I think actually older kids like to kind of sit and chill for a few minutes. They've had stressful days and kind of like to just hang out and color for a little bit. Okay, next I want to talk a bit about the two main types of behavior that we deal with in the library. There's distracting behavior and dangerous behavior. And the main difference between these two is the intention behind the behavior. Distracting or annoying behavior, the intent of that is not malicious. Most of the time, teens don't mean to be harmful. They don't realize that their behavior might be viewed as intimidating or irritating by others. Congregating in a large group, eating and drinking, talking on the phone or playing a loud game, mild PDA, and some general rowdiness. Those are all examples of behaviors that are kind of distracting, kind of annoying, but they're not actively out to hurt someone. Dangerous behavior, on the other hand, is intended to be malicious. We'll talk a little bit later about how to deal with that, but for now, examples of it include vandalism, theft, violence, bullying or cyberbullying, or profanity that's directed at another individual. These are all examples of things that are intended to hurt someone else. Those are dangerous behaviors. So it's very important to understand the difference between these two types of behaviors because you're going to deal with them in very different ways. Okay, I want to take a little quick pop quiz. So this example is of a behavior that kind of walks a line. It's a little bit gray. And I want us to try to talk about whether this is a distracting or a dangerous behavior. So you're in your teen space and you see two boys are teasing each other, calling each other names, and playfully shoving one another. Is this behavior a distracting behavior or is it a dangerous behavior? What do you think? Well, I'm happy to see you talking about Zentangles in the chat box too. That's another great one. Just take a minute. Okay, good. You guys, you see my point exactly. This behavior is distracting, but it definitely has the potential to escalate, as you all are saying. So the thing is to think about is the intention. And these boys clearly are not intending to harm one another. They're just having fun and teasing, but it definitely is the kind of behavior that walks a fine line. So you do want to keep an eye on it because you don't want it to escalate. Good job. Oh, and Melindra notes that, if you know the history between the boys, maybe they have fought before. That's another reason why it's really good to get to know the kids that use your space. All right, so we've talked about why bad behavior occurs, we've talked about how to prevent it, and the different types of behaviors that occur. Now let's talk about what we can actually do when we confront a bad behavior, when it occurs. So before the interaction, you want to determine whether the behavior is dangerous or distracting. And if you determine that it's dangerous, you're probably going to want to get some backup. You might need to grab a coworker, your director, or you might even need to get the police involved, depending on what's going on. Most libraries have policies in place for dealing with dangerous behavior, so make sure to familiarize yourself with them, just in case you're ever thrown into one of these situations. I've been pretty lucky. I haven't really had to deal with anything too dangerous with teens. We've had more issues with adults in my library, but I know that plenty other people out there have had to deal with these things before in their library. If the behavior is merely distracting, next you want to consider its context and adjust your expectations to fit. During that after-school period, teens need to blow off some steam. They've been sitting in school for hours. They've got excess energy to burn. It's good to try to be a little bit more tolerant of them at this time. You wouldn't expect toddlers to sit quietly in the children's room, especially after like a fun story time or something like that. So you shouldn't expect that of your teens. Cut them a little bit of slack during that part of the day. It's also important to think about your teens' emotional needs and their personal baggage. Like adults, they are walking around with baggage, but because of their cognitive development, their baggage seems especially heavy to them. It's hard for them to step back and get some perspective on their problems, and often they lack the power to change their circumstances, which makes things even harder for them. So I just have a quick personal story to share. I had a teen once who was extremely clingy, so clingy. She would talk to me nonstop. She would stand right in front of me at the desk and I couldn't get her to leave. She would follow me around. It would get really, really frustrating. And then I learned a little bit about what was going on in her home life. Her father had been incarcerated and it had been public. It had been in the papers, so everybody in town knew about it. Her parents were getting divorced. Her mom was working 2 jobs, so she was rarely home. So it really quickly helped me to see where she was coming from and why she was behaving the way she does. I realized, she just needed some attention. She needed to feel valued. She needed to feel heard. She needed to feel empowered. So what I ended up doing in that circumstance was giving her some projects to help me with. I had her make a display, I had her do a book list for me, and then I had her help me prepare for a program. And getting her involved and helping her feel like she was making a difference really, really helped that behavior. You also want to consider that many of your teens have special needs. And in particular, one that I've had to deal with is teens with autism spectrum disorders. Now, these teens can often get overstimulated and they might act out. It's important to be tolerant of that. You don't want them to be breaking rules, but you really want to help create some special considerations for them and be more tolerant of their behavior. I like to remember this quote from J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan: "Always be a little kinder than necessary." This is so important to do with all of your patrons, but I think it's really, really important to do with teens because they're dealing with so much. They've got so much going on. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's a nice thing to keep in the back of your head, especially on those really tough days when working with people is extra difficult. Always be a little kinder than necessary. That's my little mantra that I like to say to myself. All right. Now, before you confront bad behavior in your library, you want to get yourself mentally prepped. Put yourself in a cool, confident frame of mind. And this is tough. I know I have a temper and I am quick to anger, but it's so important to be calm, cool, and collected. I once attended another webinar where a participant mentioned that she liked to think of herself as the calm robot administrator of the rules. And I just love that. I love that idea. So remember, this is not about you. It's about enforcing a policy and helping a teen make a good choice. So if you can picture that little robot and it helps you, excellent. Okay, so you're mentally prepped, you're ready to go talk to your teen. The first step is to get the rule breaker alone. Remember, fitting in with peers is so important to teens, so they're going to want to save face in front of their friends. If you call them out in front of them, they might get defensive, and that would not be good. So try to get them alone if you can. Also, watch your tone. Make sure you're clear, firm, and you're using a neutral tone of voice. You really want to try not to get emotional or worked up in any way. I also like to introduce myself. It's good to introduce yourself and then present a specific and, if possible, positively framed choice for your teens. I like to be able to tell them what I would like them to do rather than what not to do. So here is an example, the case of the canoodlers. So at one of my old libraries, young love hung heavy in the air. I had to bear witness to much flirting, much hand-holding, much, googly lovey eyes, things like that. Most of it was pretty tame, but there's always going to be a couple kids that push the envelope a little bit. And occasionally there was a certain couple who often I would go up to the teen space and the girl would be sitting in her boyfriend's lap. I would have to go up to them and I would say, "Hey guys, I'm Jessica. I work here in the teen room. We have a rule here in the library that says all patrons need to sit in their own seats and keep their hands to themselves. Could you please grab another chair?" So I tried to present them with a choice, something I would like them to do. After the interaction, you want to be prepared to follow through with a consequence. So you want to keep an eye on the offenders. Like with these canoodling teens, if they had chosen to continue with their seating arrangement, I would go back to them and let them know that if they continued not to choose to grab another chair, then I would have to ask them to leave. And then if they didn't, I would definitely ask them to leave for the day. You also want to make sure that you communicate the incident to your fellow staff and document it if necessary. Some folks like to use a notebook to keep track of things. Some folks just like to send email to each other. And sometimes just chatting with your coworkers is enough. But this is really important because it helps create consistency, especially in a teen space that is unstaffed or that is staffed by many people. For example, I would say that I gave the canoodlers a warning, but then I had to go on break or something like that. I'd want to make sure I informed my fellow staff about the situation so that they could ensure it was handled properly and fairly. It's also very important not to hold a grudge or to expect that a teen who has misbehaved before is going to do so again. Let them start each day with a clean slate. If you do have to ask someone to leave, always let them know that they can come back and try again tomorrow. Every day is a new day and a new opportunity to make good choices. It's also nice to acknowledge and reward positive behavior. We've been talking and talking about bad things that teens do, but they're often very well behaved. Some teens respond well with praise. You just want to make sure they're not the kind of teen that's very shy or one that's going to get embarrassed if you call them out. Some libraries have incremental incentive programs where teens get to earn points toward a larger prize. Like maybe they earn a ticket each time they get good behavior. And if they get 10, then they get a gift card or something like that. Small rewards can also work too. Like sometimes they love dinky stuff like pens, candy, temporary tattoos, and stickers. You know your teens best. Tina's asking a question. Are you concerned with putting teens out of the building without supervision? I think that depends on your situation. I think most of the time teens in your library are old enough to handle themselves. And it would depend, I don't know, if the situation was dangerous, you might want to consider something else. But I think in general, teens are very independent. If they can be in the library setting by themselves, I wouldn't feel concerned about asking them to leave. But you know your teens, you know your space, your community. If you are concerned about that, I would definitely talk with my administrators to see if you had any other options. Edith is mentioning that she says it is important to be grudge-free, but to create consistency among her staff, they do keep track. And I love that 3 strikes rule. That's tested and true and works for a lot of folks. Ooh, and I love that, wiping the slate clean at the end of the year. Teens change so much from year to year. You might have a teen who is so great and sweet and wonderful when they're 13, and then something happens, and at 14 they are a hooligan. But maybe they mature a little bit and they come back and they are much better. So it's great. Always give them the benefit of the doubt. They're learning, they're growing. Just keep that in mind all the time. All right, folks, that is all that I have got for you. So I'd love to continue chatting for a few more minutes. Let me know what you'd like to know more about, what questions you have. Edith, that's exactly my experience too. The hooligan tweens that tend to mellow out. Yeah, that first couple years of adolescence seem to be the very hardest. And I found that it's true that they tend to mellow out. I also find that wacky kind of posturing behavior that they do tends to mellow out as well as they become more used to hanging out with members of the opposite sex. Oh, Elizabeth's going to try out the incentive program with her teen council. You know what? The things that teens will do for candy are incredible. I think that's going to work. Let us know how it goes. Maggie's asking, can you offer any advice on how to talk to a manager who holds grudges and uses punitive punishment a lot? Ooh, that is really tough, especially when it's a manager. I think what I might try to do is that guest speaker approach. Talk with her and see if you can get some staff training and see if you can get someone else who she might be more willing to listen to. Do you have another manager or an assistant manager or something who might be able to talk with her, who's easier to talk with? Someone else who she might view as more of an authority might be able to persuade her to change her ways a little bit. And if anybody else has thoughts, please share. That's got to be really, really tough. Vita asks, how do you handle teens who point to other teens to lay blame, the "it wasn't me" mentality? I think if that happens, if you cannot point to a single rule-breaking individual, then you have got to go with the whole group. So I would go and warn the other group that if they couldn't, the whole group, and say, I didn't see what happened. If we can't agree on who's to blame, then we're just going to have to do this as a group. And if your group can't get along or behave well, then you're going to have to leave. Oh, Stephanie says she also lets them know that they can choose who they hang out with. That's a really, really good point. And that was something I struggled with as a teen. Some of my friends were troublemakers, and sometimes I got roped into punishments because of it. That can really be an incentive to start making better choices about who you hang out with. Edith also mentions if you see bad behavior, walk away. Yes, distance yourself. Again, it's a choice. All of these things are choices. If you see bad behavior, choose to extricate yourself from that situation. This is something, it seems so common sense, but it's something that they don't always realize because they lack that ability to rationally think through situations. That doesn't always appear to them as an option at the beginning. All right, Becky's asking, how do you manage teen relationships when they talk about behaviors or situations that are dangerous? Do you have a specific example that you mean, like they're talking about potentially harming someone, or that they've dealt with something outside of the library? I think a lot of times, there's a policy in place. I know that for teachers in an educational setting, if they hear something, they are obligated to share that with an authority. I think it depends on libraries. The legal situations are very different. So you really want to make sure that you're aware of what your policy is. And if I felt really concerned that something dangerous was going to happen, then I would make sure to speak with an administrator and try to get some help. That's not the kind of situation that I would try to handle by myself because it sounds like it would be very complicated. So I would definitely try to ask for some assistance for that. Erin asks, how do you deal with teens who feel entitled? Oh, that is tough. And that is something I deal with a lot because I work in an affluent community. I really try to treat them like I would any other teen. They might be snooty or they might act, talk back. I would punish them or try to present consequences just as I would with anyone else. Okay, Becky's talking a little bit about what conversations are appropriate with teens. I think that's something that you're going to have to gauge a little bit on your own. I know I've had problems before with teens trying to get too friendly with me and asking me about my personal life, my love life, and there are certain things that I'm willing to share, certain things I don't want to talk about, and I just say that is not an appropriate thing to talk about. I think it depends on your comfort level. It's going to depend on a case-by-case basis. But that is tough. It really is a fine line because you want to be kind to them. You really want to be friendly with them. You want them to like you, but you don't want to let them cross any lines. Stephanie says that she likes to put up a hand and say inappropriate so they know they've crossed the line. That's great. Having like a little signal, that is a really good idea. And I think if it's something that you struggle with frequently, you might want to come up with an express procedure that you would follow. Oh, Nicole, thank you for sharing this. YALSA offers an on-demand webinar about keeping your library and your teen patrons protected. That's great. For all of these situations that can be really touchy where you're hearing about dangerous behaviors, I encourage you all to check that out. Yeah, it's true. There are always those repeat offenders that really just want to get to know you. It's really hard because they do start to view you as a friend. They see you as a role model and a trusted adult that they like to confide in sometimes. It really just depends on your comfort level, I think. Oh, Edith, that is awesome. You are an amazing librarian. I usually turn it into a reference interview, she says. If you need more information about XYZ, talk to an authority and check out these resources. I think that's really good too. I like to leave out materials in my teen space about Alcoholics Anonymous, about what to do if you're in an abusive relationship, eating disorders. I keep all of that out so that any teen who wants access to that information can have it. I also keep a Dewey chart, and this is an idea I found on Tumblr. It's a Dewey chart that labels the specific Dewey numbers for sensitive topics: eating disorder, sexual orientation, things like that that teens might be wondering about, might be curious about, but might be embarrassed or afraid to ask. You really want to be able to provide them with that information, and they might not want to talk to you about it. You might not want to talk to them about it. You might feel strange about it. So trying to offer them that information in other ways is a really, really great idea. I love that. Oh, Stephanie, yeah, I really do wish I could hold my hand up to adults who really want to talk to you, like those creepy guys that try to ask you out at the reference desk. Throw that hand up, inappropriate. That would be lovely if you could do that with everybody. Oh, you're welcome, Erica. I'm so glad. I really hope this was helpful for you all. This is just an ongoing topic that every librarian has to deal with. So important to talk about it. And thanks you all for coming and for participating in the conversation. This has been a really wonderful chat, a really wonderful experience. I have learned a lot too. You guys have some really, really great ideas. I have some fresh ideas that I'm going to try in my space too. Oh, Stephanie, that is so nice. I'm so glad. Thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome. This was really, really rewarding for me too. I have learned a lot from you guys. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. Nicole is going to send you out the slides, and my email address is listed at the beginning. So if you have anything else you'd like to talk about, feel free to email me. I'm happy to share. Thank you.